Hey everybody, it's Nate from Adventure in a Backpack. Today we're going to talk about a few things about our solar panel setup. So back whenever we were building everything, I pretty much gave the disclaimer that we aren't experts on this. We're not professionals. We don't know everything there is to know about solar power. That being said, we did make a few mistakes, but they're not like detrimental mistakes. We didn't do the whole thing wrong or anything like that. There's just a few tweaks that we've made, things we didn't understand whenever we did it, that we were able to see that it was wrong, troubleshoot the problem, and then remedy the problem. So we were able to do that over the last few days, and we're able to get much higher whatever, like amperage ratings from the solar panels. So that being said, that's the bad news, is that there were mistakes. The good news is we have ways to fix these mistakes, and we wanted to get this information out to you guys as soon as possible because I know a few of you are trying to build our setup, and we wanted to get on it before you made the same mistakes we did. So let's jump right into it. Okay, so the very first problem that we had was we had a breaker that was blowing. This breaker, or the breaker that was right here, it was a 150 amp breaker that looked very similar to kind of sort of like this one. If you'll remember, we'll flash back to that one, but it was right here. We have a fuse. This is a resettable fuse. At any rate, it was 150 amps, and it was the one that went from the battery to the positive bus bar. And the reason it was blowing, the reason that it was the breaker was tripping, was whenever the alternator was charging. The alternator was going back through our through this wire over here, down through the ACR, into the bus bar, through this wire, this fuse, and back into the batteries. We replaced it with this fuse because the 150 amp fuse was the same rating as the alternator. So we have a 150 amp alternator, and apparently it was charging at that, had all 150 amps at some point in time. And so that is why we were blowing that breaker. We thought that that was going to be a problem. I didn't realize whenever we were building this setup that our alternator was 150 amp alternator, and so that was kind of a mistake and an oversight on our part. So in order to fix that, we went to just Fry's Electronics because it was local, and we got a 200 amp breaker. Rather than doing that, because that's not the most cost-effective way, we have updated our kit.com to represent that. But basically, I just replaced it with a 200 amp breaker in the kit.com. But that being said, I would definitely check with what the amperage rating of your alternator is, because if you have a lesser amperage alternator, then you probably won't have that problem with this breaker blowing, the 150 amp breaker. But then on the flip side, I think some of the sprinters come with like a 220 amp alternator, so that might still be an issue with that. So that's one of those things. It's like you kind of need to check and see what your own thing is. Ours is a 150 amp alternator, and so this 200 amp fuse is good with that. The wires that we had in place, they were way oversized anyway, and so we didn't even have to replace any of the wires. Okay, so the next thing that we have figured out is we needed a remote for the inverter, the remote on-off switch. We initially didn't do that because this inverter has a power save mode, which makes it so that whenever there's no load, it basically goes into a standby and it doesn't use any power. The power save mode doesn't work on it, basically. It does work kind of, but it kind of also doesn't work. The only way that it does work is if you're plugging something that is like pretty high wattage into the power. And a lot of times the stuff we're using isn't high enough wattage to turn it on from the power save mode to go from standby to active invert. So we can't really use the power save mode on the inverter. So we needed the on-off remote because this thing pulls like 5 amps whenever it is just on, whenever all the internal parts are just moving, and when it's just on. So to save any kind of power, we needed to crawl back here and turn it to inverter off to actually turn it off until we actually needed to invert power from 12 volts to 110. So that's that being said, if you had this mounted somewhere like in your living space, then it would be no big deal to reach inside your cabinet and turn this to just to off. But since this is mounted back here, we were having to open that up, and I was having to crawl on top of our paddle boards and all that kind of stuff to get to the switch. So that being said, the remote is going to be a necessity. Now, for the remote for this particular inverter, it's like $150, which for an on-off switch is kind of ridiculous. It's got all the monitoring and stuff, but that's kind of irrelevant with our system because the our Midnight Solar Classic 150 has monitoring on it, and it does a very good job at that. So all we need is an on-off switch. Now, the on-off switch by Ames is apparently not compatible with this inverter. Now, that being said, on the Amazon reviews, there was a guy that was saying that he just wired a basic toggle switch into the, let's see, was the RJ45 cable, which is basically an Ethernet cable that plugs into the remote input on the inverter. He basically put a toggle switch in between two of the wires, but I don't know that much about that kind of cable, about an Ethernet cable, to make that work. So if you do know about that and would like to help me troubleshoot that and figure that out, let me know in the comments below, and I may have some questions to bounce off of you. So anyway, I think that's all I have to say about the inverter, the fuse. So let's move on to the low input we were getting from the solar panels. Okay, and then one of the other things that we're going to talk about is the solar panels themselves. So whenever we put out the first wiring diagram, all of our panels were wired in parallel, which, if you'll remember, basically we've got 5 solar panels. 2, 3, 4, and 5, and they were all wired in parallel, which what that means is we've got positives and positives going together from each spot, essentially. Let's see how I can do this. So we got this, and we got that, and we got that, and we got that, and then we've got that, kind of. So all your positives are going to one spot, all your negatives are going to another spot, into a junction box, and then the positives are going down and the negatives are going down to the solar controller. So that is not correct. For the Midnight Classic 150, the more volts the better, up to basically 150 volts. So we were getting less than optimal power from our solar panels, and I called Midnight Solar Controllers, their tech support, and they said that's likely why, because the volts of open current was only like 20 point something, and basically the lower our batteries got and the less sun there was, it doesn't work like that. It's not optimal. We were never getting over, like, I think the highest number of watts basically I saw was about 200. The most amps I ever saw was about 21, which we should be getting closer to 45, or because we have 825 watts of solar up on top. Now our panels aren't tiltable, but we'll talk about that in just a second. But we should have been getting better numbers than that. Wasn't very happy with it, so we went on the quest to find out why. So got it figured out. Basically, we needed to wire all of our panels into series. Steph, could you give me a rag? I can wipe. So we needed to put all these in series. And what that did, I did this yesterday, and we already have better results from it, is basically from the charge controller down here. That's charge controller. And then we've got power coming that way, we got a positive coming that way, and we got our negative coming to this one. And then from there, it's just a wire that goes from, so we'll say positive here, and negative, and we'll go negative, 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 positive, 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 positive. So we've got the positive there, negative there to the charge controller, and then you're just going to go from this negative to this positive, this negative to this positive, this negative to this positive, this negative to this positive. And so that's how that's going to work. And basically that's going to take it from a 12, bear with me on this one. It's going to take it from basically a 12 volt solar panel array up to a much higher voltage, but that's what that charge controller is designed to do. It wants as many amps as you can feed it, basically up to 150 amps, and it wants as many volts as you can feed to it, and then it will find how basically the MPPT, the maximum power point tracking part of it, finds the most amount of amps it can deliver from the voltage. Something like that. It does some kind of voltage amperage magic inside that little box. But this is how the Midnight Solar Controller company wanted it set up. They said that that's the way we should do it if we've got 5 solar panels, because that's going to be, it's like 20 volts, 20 volts, 20 volts, 20 volts. 20 volts, we're going to be up about 100 volts. And they said that would give us even a little bit of safety margin for when it gets cold, because apparently when it gets colder, your voltages go up. So, that being said, they said this is the best way to set that up. Now, I know a few of you are doing a little larger system or even a little smaller system, up to 6 panels. So, that might be even better, honestly, but what we would do with that is then we would go from the positive to negative, the positive to negative, into a series of 3. We'll go negative here, and positive here, down to the charge controller, and then we'll go positive to negative, and we'll go negative to here, and positive to there. So basically you're putting these 3 into series, these 3 into series, and then you're paralleling both of those down. So that would be 60 volts between these and 60 volts between these, 60 volts here, and that's how they said to do that. If you did it with 4, it would be the same way. You would just knock out this one. So we will put together an updated wiring diagram and send it to everybody. If you're watching this video, like basically as soon as it launches, we're going to do it. You're going to get another email that's an update. But if you're catching this video like a week out from it being published, if you put in your email into our updated solar wiring diagram email list, it's on our website. You will get the updated one the first go. So, I hope that makes sense. If it doesn't make sense, let me know in the comments below and I will try my hardest to clear it up. Now that being said, let's talk about what we are getting out of the system now. Okay, so right now it's mid-morning, and so the sun is not overhead. Our panels are not tilted, anything like that. We've got let's see, lights are on. We got 3 sets of lights. Our refrigerator is actively cooling, and we're still making 14.5 amps. Let me cycle back around. So our panels are now making 350-ish watts. We're bringing in like 90 volts. We are on 23.5 amps. And the guys at Midnight Solar Controller, they said that's pretty good. That's what we should be getting. Basically, like 50% output is pretty good for flat panels. So we are happy with that. If that's about as good as we can get out of it, we are happy with how that works. It's much better now. Beforehand, like I said, we were probably getting like 200 something amp, 250 amps, like for maybe an hour a day, and as soon as the sun broke out from behind the clouds about an hour ago, we were already getting like 19 amps and 300 watts. Yesterday as soon as I rewired this up, we were getting about 35 to 38 amps, which was about 2:30 in the afternoon, so past the time of peak sun. So basically it's way better. So that being said, wish I would have caught that the first time around, but hey, that's how this works sometimes. So let's go ahead and talk about tilting the panels, because that's the next thing that I would recommend doing for if you can. So let's go ahead and go talk about that. Okay, so let's talk about tilting panels. Tilting panels is one of the ways that you can basically get the most amount of power out of your panels. I really wanted to do that before we left, but we just ran out of time, basically. So the reason tilting your panels is so important, because if you see where I'm standing right now, and shadow is like way over there. sorry, this is going to be really lame, but if I was tilted like this, you see how my shadow gets much smaller? That's really what you're trying to do with the solar panels. You're trying to basically have the panels hit it at the rays of the sun hit your panels at a 90-degree angle to get the most amount of power. So let's talk about why we are not going to be able to tilt our panels in the foreseeable future. Okay, so let's talk about why tilting is going to be a problem for us. Whenever we had our roof rack made by Luminous, we instructed them to put this piece of angle iron flipped upside down so that this piece was level with the top of this. So right here, this piece of metal would be on the bottom of the solar panels, and then we could just run a short bolt through here to here. But if it was upside down, it would just be from there to there. Now what that would do, that would give us a good spot to be able to mount a hinge to, as well as the tilt brackets. So since that didn't happen, since the ball got dropped on that one, it kind of puts us in a tough spot in being able to do any kind of like tilt hinge. So I think I could probably put like a piece of square tubing in there, but that's just not something that's happened right now, and I don't really like that option. That's not, I just don't feel like it's going to look good. It's going to look kind of janky. So that's not something that we've done. So that is why, let me see if I can brighten up this picture a little bit. So that's why that is not going to be an option. I think a few people have asked how we mounted the solar panels to the roof rack, and I haven't been able to get a really good representation of that. But anyway, yeah, the metal that was incorrectly installed by Luminous, and then we just got a long stainless steel bolt that goes through that, and it sucks the solar panel down to basically right there on top of that, the round tubing. So is tilting solar panels worth it? The thing is I've seen so many different like videos and blogs and articles and studies and what have you that that tell you how much better it is to have them tilted. I would definitely like to have ours tilted. That being said, it's not a make or break kind of thing, but it still would be very nice. But sometimes you just have to play the cards you're dealt and just roll with what you do, the best you can with the stuff you've had. And since kind of Luminous dropped the ball on listening to our instructions on how to do this, and I mean, hate to throw anybody under the bus, but then didn't really have any kind of like way to fix it. They didn't really seem very interested in fixing their mistake. It was one of those things, they've got a lot of business, they're always so booked, and so maybe fixing the problem that they created for this wasn't one of their things. But that's kind of speculation. Like I said, hate to throw anybody under the bus, but kind of that was the more we're messing with our solar, it's like the more bitter I kind of get about that whole scenario, about now the fact that it's made it harder for us to tilt our panels. So maybe I'll come up with a better solution to that one of these days. Maybe not. Maybe we'll just leave them flat. I expect, so when I'm talking to Midnight Solar, I was asking them, like, should we be able to expect 800 watts from our panels if we have them tilted? And they said, yeah, you really should. Like, if not right at it, like really close to it. And if the colder the weather gets, you'll actually probably produce more. So that would be really nice to have. That being said, we are still very, very happy with our solar panel setup. It's even with the lower than expected charges that we were experiencing beforehand, it was still able to keep us charged up more than adequately. And so now that we have this, basically we should have zero problems. What we're seeing with this now is it's being really, really good for even when it's overcast. This morning, so we're in San Diego as we speak, and it seems like every morning until about 10 o'clock it's like super foggy, overcast kind of thing, just the fog rolling in off the ocean. And even though it was foggy and overcast, we were still bringing in amps, whereas whenever all these were in parallel, we weren't bringing in anything. We were just losing power anytime we had the lights on. So I think that is all I have to talk about. I hope this update hasn't been too much trouble. I hope it hasn't caused any more trouble. I wanted to get this out as soon as I could after finding out all of our problems, because like I said, I think a few people are trying to build this exact setup, and we wanted to make sure that nobody else like got ahead of themselves. We wanted to make sure nobody got ahead of our mistakes and made the same mistakes we did. So if you did already, you know, super sorry about that, but I think that's a game you play when you're going off of YouTube advice. We really do try to make everything as error-free as possible, but hey, you know, sometimes we miss. But anyway, that being said, I think that is all I have to talk about this particular update. If you have any questions, be sure to leave them in the comments below, and I will get back to them as soon as possible. So that being said, you should have some icons popping up on your screen at this point. One's going to be a subscribe button. You're going to be able to stay current on any future updates we have on our solar, as well as our van life and adventure updates. The other one is going to be a link to our blog, where you can check out our adventures, as well as some more of the detailed descriptions of what we do. And the last one's going to be a playlist, so that you can binge watch all of our videos. So until next time, we'll see you later.